Welcome to the Bernie's Bootlegs podcast, where we explore the stories of successful musicians and share their perspectives on being an artist in a digital age. I'm your host, Kenny McCabe, and let's get into the show. In today's episode, we're speaking with drummer Adam Arruda. We discussed growing up in Toronto, the value of getting to play with older musicians, his time at the Brubeck Institute and Berklee College of Music, his upcoming projects and gigs, what he attributes his success as a sideman to, his thoughts on preventing market rates for musicians from being diluted, and much more. You can find Adam on his website at adamarruda.net and also on Instagram at adamarruda89. And so without further ado, I bring you my conversation with Adam Arruda. Okay, guys, I'm here with Adam Arruda. Adam, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me, man. Especially, among the roster of amazing, talented musicians that you have. I feel very fortunate to be here, man. So thanks.
Yeah, man, my pleasure. I'm happy to add you to the cast of characters, as it were. And so we're dealing with some technical difficulties, but I like to always say this, but like our technological overlords willing should be good to go. But we haven't had a chance to really talk. So how are you, man?
I'm all right. A little tired right now, but waking up, got some coffee, man. So I'm doing pretty good. Yeah.
I like it. So you are originally from Toronto, is that correct?
That's right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've never been to Toronto, but I've pretty much only heard positive things about it. But from my understanding, it probably wouldn't be easily recognized as like a jazz scene place. Was there a relatively strong music scene there?
There was, and is. It is a bit under the radar, I guess. But there was definitely. I've heard stories of. And personally seeing people come through, like a lot of people would come through and pick up musicians, like Cedar Walton would come through and play with people like Barry Elms, is a great drummer from Toronto. I think he might not be from Toronto, but that's where he's been working out of for, 40 years or something like that, So I got to see a lot of stuff like that, as well as just great local musicians with a pretty strong scene, a lot of amazing guitar players, especially came out of Toronto, and right now there's quite a list of remarkable guitar players that are there, or some guys you might be possibly aware of, it was great growing up there, and there were the cool thing was that there were a couple clubs that are now defunct, unfortunately, but a lot of American acts would come through. I got to see Jimmy Cobb, really young, McCoy Tyner, people like this, and the cool thing about these two places, one was called the Montreal Bistro, the other one was the Top of the Senator, and if you played at either of the venues, it would be like a week stint of 2 sets a night gigs. And that was pretty rare, I'm not sure if there's even a place in like Chicago or Philly or LA or something that's still kind of does that. Maybe the Green Mill or something. Mm-hmm. Like, you could play, I think, 2 nights in a row there, but the whole week stint thing is kind of a little bit lost, in
yeah,
time.
I mean, the only club that comes to mind for me that still does that would be probably the Vanguard.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
But every other, the majority of other places, it's gotten so the granular, the sets. Like a lot of places will just have a band just play one set. They don't even play 2 sets, but they'll have 3-4 bands in one night. And so the whole week stint thing, that's got to be super interesting. And I'm sure in Toronto when musicians like that came through, I'm sure you were there as much as possible. So it must have also been super interesting to get to see folks like that, and get to see how the set or how the music changes from night to night, because they are going to end up playing 10 or 15 sets in total.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, sometimes they would even, depending on the act, because I think the showtime ran to about maybe an hour and a half, even. So to try to play 2 sets of uniquely different music, it's pretty tough. So you might be repeating a lot of things, but that was actually cool to hear. Like, I remember seeing Chris Potter's Underground band. I think right before, they didn't even have a record out yet. That was, I don't know, 2004 or something. Craig Taborn was playing Rhodes.
Mm-hmm.
Nate Smith was on drums, and Wayne Krantz was on guitar. I think it was just the 4 of them. And they played, I remember they played like Radiohead's Morning Bell like a couple times and some things like that. And it was cool, man, because if you stayed the first set, you could kind of just buy a drink and then stick around. For me, it was like a Coca-Cola or whatever, and I could just like stick around for the second set,
Exactly. That's the way to do it.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to ask you about when you got started playing the drums and kind of how that came about. Was your family, were there musicians in your family, or were they music lovers? What was the situation there?
Well, yeah, some of my earliest memories as a kid was growing up in my family's house. It was a interesting situation. It was myself, my parents, my grandparents, and my great-grandmother all in this house. and some of my earliest memories are my dad putting on music, and then my mom walking around the house kind of like dancing, like holding me and like dancing to the music and stuff. And I do remember that. My dad he still plays bass and drums, not really professionally, and he kind of stopped for a little bit. I think he got a little bit freaked out when I started playing and got a little bit self-conscious, But I always thought that he was a pretty amazing musician. Great feel, and his love of music is both of my parents. They just, I don't know, man. There was always music on and CDs everywhere and like LPs and stuff, and I don't know. In that sense, it was really cool just having this positive musical thing just around without, it was just a very musical house, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
But
was it all kinds of music? Did your parents like specific genres, or was it just a wide variety?
I mean, really, really wide variety of stuff. Like, we could be listening to Parliament Funkadelic, or the Meters, or Stevie Ray Vaughan, or the Doors, or Led Zeppelin, or Miles Davis. I mean, it was, and I love all that stuff too. I felt weird as a kid because a lot of my friends had no idea. I would be like, "Hey, do you know this guy or this girl?" And they'd be like, "I have no idea who you're talking about, man. Like, I'm listening to 50 Cent right now." So I was a bit of a musical outcast amongst my peer group of friends that were not musical, But as far as growing up in my house, yeah, it was, there was a drum set up that my dad would come home from work a lot of the times and just like play along to Steely Dan records. I remember he played along to like Asia for years, and I remember as a kid, I don't really know how that came about, but my parents got me this little guitar, like a little acoustic guitar. And I played it like left-handed, but I had no idea how to play it. I was almost playing it like a drum, and my dad and I would just like fake jam out along to records that he would have on the stereo system, and then it would be bedtime, So that was, an amazing, fun, like super fun. There was no seriousness about it at all. It was just like having fun with music, which that's what I try to remember every day doing this. Yeah.
Yeah, I have similar, thoughts too about, just looking back at how fun music was when you're that young because there's no responsibilities of like needing to shed this or that music for a gig or whatever. It's just all for fun. And, I as well try and remember that time and try
Yeah.
and maintain that sense of freeness because those were good times.
Yeah, definitely.
Do you think it was mainly the fact that your dad was playing drums around the house? Is that kind of what led you to pick up the drums? Do you think?
Well, I guess so. It's hard to say. I mean, both. I don't want to exclude my mother out of it either. She was literally moving around the house with me, and maybe in a way that probably affected the way that I feel music. I'm sure. Uh, but but yes, I mean, my father had a large and huge impact on on me. I mean, as a kid, when there's like, you're living in a house like that and it's a little cramped and you have a lot of relatives around, um, uh, that drum set downstairs was like the best toy ever, So, and it was totally cool for me to like go on there and touch it and play it. And he didn't care if, he knew that I would respect it and I wouldn't trash the drums or anything like that, So, um, I'm quite fortunate that I had somewhere to even play a drum set indoors growing up. I know a lot of people that they don't even have that opportunity, man. So, not to mention all the hours of me practicing all through the years and my parents pretty much being cool. And, by the time it got to like 9 p.m., the lights would come on and off. And that was a sign for me to shut up, Uh, so, the short answer is yes, I guess that my father was definitely instrumental in a very natural way and just kind of like introducing me to this stuff without really ever saying this is a drum set or these are these records. It was just kind of like around and that's what I knew, So
Yeah, so you
yeah,
mentioned not having, too many friends that were interested in maybe the same kind of music or as wide a variety of music as you said that you're listening to like 50 Cent or whatever it was at the
mm,
time, whatever
yeah.
whatever was popular. But did that kind of change, as you entered high school? Were you able to kind of find any,
Well,
compatriots who were kind of trying to do the same thing?
it happened actually even before high school. I was super fortunate. I'm not. I have to find exactly the story from my parents, but from the age of 5, I started taking music lessons. There's this. I guess it's a style of teaching called the ORF method, ORFF, and I was doing that through the Royal Conservatory of Music in Toronto as a 5-year-old, and I had a lot of fun doing that. But basically, I'll tell you how the classes went. Is that you would go in there, they would have you do a lot of moving around the room, kind of like feeling and dancing to things. Then they would write out rhythms and teach you how to read them. So for instance, like uh, they had a whole way of teaching children how to read rhythms and clap them in time and stuff. And then you would have like your own little, almost like a little wooden marimba kind of thing. And each kid had a different key in the room, and they had a part, and you had to remember your part, and then together you would play a piece of music, which I remember being frustrated and telling my parents, like, listen, I've never seen anybody play this instrument. Why are we playing these? And I want to play the whole instrument. I don't want to just play one key, And basically, I think we got a letter in the mail for a program called the Humber College Community Music School, and it was a weekend program, Saturdays. I'd have drum lessons there, be able to play in an ensemble with people, as well as master classes, and they would have guest artists come in as well from out of town or whatever, and we'd be able to perform a couple times that year, whether it was in the auditorium of the college or they'd had performances at the Rex Jazz Club in Toronto. And so I started doing that, I think, around the age of 5 or 6. And that's when I started actually taking drum lessons and learning how to read charts and drum notation and how grooves fit together and independence and all that kind of stuff. But the most important thing was getting to play with musicians that were older than. I always felt like the youngest musician in the band for years and years and years. You know, I'd be playing in an ensemble and most of the people were, 15, 16 years old, and I was like 7, So that kind of gave me a bit of inspiration to just do better all the time and try to catch up to where they were. And yeah, so that's kind of how that unfolded.
Yeah, I mean, in a lot of ways, it's a very positive thing to be, the youngest or the least experienced person in the room, because there's nowhere to go but up.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. But the cool thing was that I got to meet a lot of other people that had similar interests, especially in my neighborhood growing up in Toronto. I grew up in like Little Italy. There's not a whole lot of, at that time, there wasn't really a whole lot of artistic people, I guess you could say, around. So especially not at my elementary school or anything like that. People were more into like playing hockey and pogs and stuff, so when I was lucky enough to attend the Humber program, some of my best friends still to this day are people that I ended up even going to high school with, that I met through that program.
Yeah, man. So obviously now you are based in New York City and doing a lot of cool stuff. But I was wondering if you could maybe give us maybe a brief overview of kind of the timeline of you graduating high school in Toronto, and then from then, college and all the things you did, and basically from then until when you moved to New York.
Sure. So I graduated high school. I went to this arts high school in Toronto. I graduated from there in 2008. From there, I moved on to the Brubeck Institute, and I did a year there, which was fantastic. Pretty amazing experience in my life. I learned a lot about myself, and it's a special environment. It's sad that it's now defunct as of very recently, and but man, what an amazing opportunity that was. Maybe I could get into that a little more later, but so I attended the Brubeck Institute for a year, and from there I was a little sick for a year, so I took a year off of school. Kind of was not planned. But after that, I had gone to Berklee College of Music for 3 years, and I graduated from there in 2013, and that's when I moved to New York, and I've been here since. So in short.
Yeah, I would love for you to elaborate on the Brubeck Institute, because that, as I've seen from talking to a few different folks now, was a really great environment for learning and for playing. Yes, maybe you can elaborate on your experience there a little bit.
Well, I had some pretty big shoes to fill. One of my best friends growing up, a guy by the name of Brian Chawley, still is one of the most talented musicians I've met. He can play the trumpet incredibly, plays the bass, plays piano. He was kind of an old soul and someone way beyond his years, and I respect the man greatly. And so he was always he kind of opened some doors for me, just because I would see him do some things and say, wow, that's really cool. I'd love to do that, like the Brubeck Institute, right? So he was in there before me. We're maybe 4 or 5 years separated in age. He was there for 2 years, and then his third year he was actually working at the institute, helping with booking different guest artists and stuff like that. So so I asked Brian about how to audition and everything, and he gave me all the information. I sent in a tape. We were asked to. They flew us out to California to Yoshi's to do this auditioning process, and I remember George Cables was there, and I think Dave Brubeck might have been there actually. I think he might have arrived a little late or something. But there was quite a few of us, and then we were, they basically ask you to go on stage and like play a bunch of tunes together until they find some people that in their eyes work together musically, and I was very surprised that I got accepted, to be honest with you, and with some friends that we had done some jazz camps and stuff like that, like Vale, the Vale Jazz Workshop, which that is incredible. Lewis Nash, John Clayton, Terrell Stafford, Bill Cunliffe. Man, yeah, that changed things for me growing up, and that's where I got to meet some of these guys. And then we attended the Brubeck Institute. We got in, and the structure of the program was pretty loose. You would have class maybe 2 or 3 times a week, and our instructor was this incredible piano player named Joe Gilman, and he. We got to see him play with Bobby Hutcherson many times. He's Bobby Hutcherson's pianist for must be over 20 years, right up until he passed. And Joe had to deal with 5 18-year-olds with opinions and crazy stuff, and one of the most patient and kind people. Thank you, Joe, if you're watching this. Man, I learned a lot from him. And, so we would have class, and then basically, man, we just were free to practice and play together and, write tunes. And, by the end of the year, we had recorded an album in the kind of winter, spring, and then and then a CD in the summer, spring, summer, and Joe's album. So we basically had recorded a double album plus Joe's record. That's how many tunes these guys were all writing. I only contributed like 1 or 2, classic drummer over here. But man, that was a super important learning experience for me. It was the first time in my life where I got to play other people's original music with that frequency, and having to learn. I'm still working on this, but kind of having to learn how to play a tune you've never seen before as if you've known it for years, and pull it off. Kind of know your own limitations, but still have that, that kind of curiosity and risk-taking within it as well, And the cool thing was, man, is after like a year of playing with the same 4 other people, you really get tight, and it's almost like you could read each other's minds and know exactly what could happen, and these choices are all laid in front of you, and you can kind of pick them and choose them as they go along, and that. Man, that is rare, and especially at that age, I was extremely fortunate to be there, especially with the guys that I was there with. They were so talented. I had a lot of kind of catching up. Felt like I kind of had some catching up to do. A bit self-conscious about where I was at, Also knowing that some of the people that were there before me, like like Justin Brown and Joe Sanders and Colin Stranahan, Corey Cox, some of these drummers, man. It's like, what am I doing? What am I doing here exactly? So, yeah, that was amazing. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that kind of relationship with musicians that you're playing with basically on a daily basis for a year, that is super rare. I mean, the whole concept of like a band, kind of in the old sense of where you have the same exact people, you know, playing each other's music and you know, for an extended period of time, that really does not exist anymore as far as I can tell.
Yeah.
Because I don't know why, you know, I mean, it's probably a factor thing. You know, maybe it's just that there's so many more musicians now, or so many more great musicians, or I don't really know. I mean, the internet probably has something to do with it. You know, you can have a much wider network, I guess. But yeah, so that's super awesome. And so you end up going to Berklee for 3 years, and maybe you can just say a few words about that. You know, maybe if there was any particular mentors or peers that had a big influence on you there.
Sure. Well, some slight name dropping here, but in a positive sense, is that I was surrounded by unbelievable drummers. That was one of the things that was like, I really want to go to Berklee, was when I was aware of some of the people that were going there as students on the drums, you know. And to mention some names, for those 3 years, Jonathan Pinson, Corey Fonville, Justin Faulkner, Joe Dyson, Mark Whitfield Jr., Kush Abiday, Sean Wright, Matt Garska, who am I missing? Jordan Rose, Oscar Suhanik. The list goes on and on. I'm sure I'm forgetting some folks, but that was some pretty inspiring drumming to be around, man. I think I mentioned Kush Abiday.
Yeah.
Yeah, man, just unbelievable. A lot of those guys, some of them stuck around and graduated. Some of them moved on to other schools or whatever to New York. But I was lucky to be there at that time, and at that age, to get to see these guys with my own eyes in front of me doing the things that they were doing on the drums was pretty special, and informed me quite a bit. And school was super loose too, man. I mean, we had an amazing education, but at the same time had a lot of opportunity to hang out and just, have like parties at each other's apartments, have music, bands would be playing, tons of sessioning. And there is this one double drum room that exists. I'm sure it's still there, in one of the Berklee buildings, that you could basically go down there at any time, and two ridiculous drummers would just be down there kind of like battling it out, which as a drummer is I think it's kind of important to kind of get that out of your system in a way, but also get those muscles working, get yourself limbered up, and kind of do it that way, just through playing, tossing ideas back and forth, and just like watching people in that zone. It was pretty cool. So, and some of my professors there had a huge impact on me. Jamie Haddad, very inspiring guy. I was in this situation where I was put in this mixed world ensemble, it was called, and I had really no experience playing anything except, kind of Black American music, and so we were kind of like playing a mixture of things that were a fusion of styles, and the ensemble was led by Jamie Haddad, and as well as Alan Malay, who is a fantastic piano player, and he toured with Paul Simon. In fact, both of those gentlemen toured with Paul Simon for years, and so we got to deal with some different kind of music in that situation. That was great. Also, just playing in an ensemble with a percussionist as well. I really love that. Um, just that round, the way that rounds out the sound and kind of you fit inside um, each other's grooves in that way is super fun. And not to mention Dave Santoro, another professor. Where we kind of that was more in the hard bop vein, where we would play a lot of Sonny Clark tunes and different stuff like that. Neil Smith was my drum teacher for the last 2 years, or semesters, I should say, maybe 2 or 3 semesters of school, and we're still very good friends and in touch, and I have to thank Neil for. If you ask anyone, he's an extremely generous guy, almost too generous. But we would just basically hang out in his drum room where he would teach in his office, and he would kind of always go over your lesson time, and there would be a lot of people in there, and just listening to music and showing us things. Amazing brush player. And Terry Lynn Carrington, I was lucky enough to study with her for my first semester of school. Just some, great opportunities to play with different students as well in those different settings. Ralph Peterson was another teacher of mine, playing in his ensemble, kind of maybe nonettes, septets, kind of bigger ensembles like that. And there'd be like 3 drummers, it was like one of them was, I think it was myself, Corey Farnville, and Willie Rodriguez. Were all in the same ensemble, just like trading off when we were playing. Yeah, man, it was just a super fun, honestly, exciting time, and the great thing about Berklee is that I feel that I kind of gravitated towards schools where I was able to actually play the drums a lot of the time. I didn't want to just be stuck in the books. Sure, I had to do some liberal arts classes and stuff like that, but they were still musical in some senses. They would be tied into music in some way, but the amount of time that I was afforded to play the drums was great. And I don't know how some people do it, where they're just in the classroom and you talk and talk and talk, and then you never actually get to play. Like, what's the point? It's all great, but you can't. There's not enough words in the English language, in any language, to really describe what the heck we're doing. And when it comes down to it, opinions and words and all that kind of stuff are great, but the music speaks for itself, right? So, and that was great that people had that kind of understanding and allowed us to play, So.
Yeah, man, I feel the exact same way. It's all about the music, I think. And so, after you graduate, you could have done a couple different things. You could have stayed in Boston, probably. You could always have gone back to Toronto, but you kind of decide, okay, I need to be in New York. Like, I want to move there. What made you decide to move to New York?
I don't remember a time where that wasn't like my biggest dream in life, is to move here. It was kind of like, if you were a kid collecting baseball cards or something, and then like you find out what team, maybe if that's a good analogy, like all your favorite players played on or something, that this was my team that I wanted to be on. I wanted to be on the New York team. And, I was like, oh, Elvin Jones, he lived in New York, and Tony Williams and Joe Chambers, and the list goes on and on. There must be something about living in New York. And of course, when I got to visit here for the first time, I think in like 2004 or so, I was blown away, and it was even more than I expected it could be. I remember getting to see man, I got to see Kurt Rosenwinkel's group. I got to see Brad Meldau's trio, um, uh, Robert Glasper with Chris Dave back then. Just some amazing music. And whenever, acts would come through Toronto and play, and they were from New York, I would always go, and I would always be satisfied at the end of the show and inspired, that's what made me want to move here, is historical reasons that are tied into the music, and I kind of just wanted to do what all my heroes did, and just try to do what they did. So yeah.
Yeah, man, that's the way to do it, I would say. And so let's fast forward a little bit.
Yeah.
Been in New York for some time, and just tell us a little bit about what you've been up to recently. The kinds of things you're doing, and just what's going on.
Sure. Recently, I've been playing with just a lot of different groups, different people. I can't really pinpoint one thing and say this is the one thing that I'm doing right now. But that's basically what I want to do, So, recently this Claffy 2 record was released that I was a part of, and I've been playing with Alex's project in some of his projects for about 4 years now or so, I think. This album was recorded maybe 3 years ago in January, I think. It's a little confusing because we recorded a couple records with like a year in between. So this record that was released was actually recorded a year before the Standards album. Excuse me. So just been playing with him a bit. Actually, that's where I met you
Yes.
at Fat Cat. Yeah.
Fat Cat, indeed.
There is a album with a friend of mine from back home, Trevor Giancola, that was released on the 25th of October, which is entitled Sonnet 18. That features Rick Rosado and Seamus Blake. So that was just released. A vocalist by the name of Christiana Romer I had recorded with her a couple months back. I'm not sure when that album's going to be released, but that features Alex Claffey on bass, Addison Fry on keyboards and piano. Ben Monder is on a couple tunes. What else? A friend of mine by the name of Tommaso Gambini is an amazing guitar player. We got to go to Italy in May on a little tour with the pianist is Manuel Schmiedel and Ben Tiberio. The bass player Dana Stevens joined us, and Ben Van Gelder. And we recorded an album in June. That's going to be released at some point. And then later this month, I'll be going to California with a saxophonist who lives in New York, who's originally from the Bay Area, by the name of Kazemde George, with his group. And we play pretty much every Tuesday here in Brooklyn, in my neighborhood, at a place called Salem's Hour, which is it's a jam session as well. We play like a set, and then it's a jam afterwards. I don't play every Tuesday. He mixes up the bands quite a bit, but the main band is pretty much myself, Isaac Wilson on keys, Tyrone Allen II on bass, Kazemde and Sammy Stevens on vocals. And that Thanksgiving weekend of this month, we'll be traveling to San Francisco and playing the Black Cat, I believe, all week. As far as just stuff in New York, like tonight I'm playing at Bar Next Door with Andrew Renfro, amazing guitar player, and Rick Rosado is going to be on bass, and we're doing the 3-set thing there tonight. And but I've just been playing with a lot of different people. Last night I played with Tomoko Omura's band with Rick and Edin Ladin on piano. Yeah, just a lot of different stuff, man. So,
Yeah, man.
yeah.
What do you think enables you, or what kind of stuff do you think about, that you work on in order to be able to play in so many different contexts?
That's a good question. I'm not even sure if I know. I'm still trying to figure that out. I'm just surprised people hit me up and ask me to play, and I'm just grateful to be there. I mean, I think it kind of goes back maybe to the thing that I was talking about at the Brubeck Institute, of just being able to look at a piece of music. I mean, first of all, let me say this is like, I really don't, if I can, I'd rather not be reading music on stage. So if someone sends me music, I'll print it out at home and make notes, and especially if they send me MP3s and stuff, like I'll just mark up the entire page to the point where everything's in here, you know? And I'd much rather be operating on that level than staring at the page, which sometimes you need to, you know. Some music sometimes it's the music that's hard to memorize as well, or the roadmap of the thing, and you have no choice. But I think I was afforded the opportunity to be able to kind of traverse those sonic, murky, rhythmic waters, and figure that out sort of at an early age, which informed me on little tricks, you know, on how to approach new music that's presented to you, even till this day, you know. And rehearsing definitely always helps if people have the time, but you know, there's also the certain sense of, even though you might be playing somebody's music you've never seen before, you might be familiar with playing with them or other people that they called to play with too. So it's like there's always this kind of like safety net. Just because, I mean, the musicians here are so freaking incredible that you know, everything kind of just has its way of working out, and when it doesn't, we could kind of try to like mask that and give you the illusion that it is, and figure it out as it's going on. Which, man, to me, sometimes that's the coolest shit in music. Excuse my language, but that's the coolest. Some of the coolest stuff in music is not knowing, and then kind of working together, you know, to figure out how to make something and how to make nothing into something, and steer your way back towards land, you know? So, yeah.
Yeah, I always love, you know, seeing that, you know, at least the times where you're aware of it, you know. I mean, being a musician, you know, might make you a little bit more aware of when the band might be lost in the form, or like any number of things that could happen. But then just having everything, you know, come back together and is just an amazing experience to observe, and also to be a part of. So yeah, that's always awesome. And, you know, it's just obviously it's a challenge, you know, trying to perform in such a way where if you mess up, the audience hopefully won't notice, I guess, is kind of an important thing. But something that's said a lot is that for musicians that are just starting out in their careers, the best thing to do, or in order to establish as many opportunities down the road, is to just kind of say yes to everything, at least at first. Is that something that you subscribe to?
I feel, that's a tough one. I would say yes on a musical level. Financially, though, it could have an impact on everyone else, the entire scene, right? Playing for free is something that I do have a bit of a problem with. but that's not to say that I haven't done that, and it's a tough one to deal with, especially if it's a close friend hitting you up or somebody you really enjoy playing with. But I think we all have to take note and that we actually have a certain value, and sometimes as a youngster, it's okay to have some patience and just wait for the right time and the right opportunity where you can say yes, and it's actually a situation where everyone benefits, But on a musical level, absolutely say yes to every opportunity. Anytime anyone wants to play with you, that's a bit of a pat on your back to yourself, that someone's that's nice enough to hit you up to see something in you that they want in their life. So that's how I feel about that, if that makes any sense. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And,
Yeah.
Maybe it could be summed up as something like, try and put yourself in as many as wide a variety of musical circumstances as possible, but at the same time,
Mm-hmm.
don't undervalue yourself. If you're
Yeah.
putting a lot of hard work into being a musician and improving your skills, those are skills that you would hope would have value, and you don't want to undercut everybody. And so,
Exactly.
something
Yeah.
that happens a lot is if people are competing against each other, to play, then it kind of undercuts everyone, and the overall price goes down. And so I think that's
Yep.
super important to keep in mind.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Yes.
Yeah, man. And so where's the best place for people to find you?
It would be my website, which is adamarruda.net. I try to keep it pretty updated as far as where I'm playing and stuff like that. That's basically it. My Facebook as well, although I'm not as active as some other people on there. But people will tag me in things that gigs that I'm playing and stuff like that. But I do post most of my gigs. I try to post on my website, adamarruda.net. Is where you could find me. Yeah.
Awesome, man. All the links to your Facebook and website will be in the show notes, of course. And I just want to thank you so much for sharing your time with us, and for sharing your story and giving your perspective on what it's like out there.
Man, thank you so much, Kenny, man. It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. It's my pleasure.
Yeah.
Stay on the line for 1 second, and thank you again.
All right, man. Thanks.
Thank you so much for checking out the podcast. Don't forget to subscribe wherever you happen to be listening to this. And if you enjoyed the podcast, consider giving it a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast app. For more episodes, please visit berniesbootlegs.com. Thanks again, and see you guys next time.